What's interesting about cultural difference is it manifests in a lot of different ways. First of all, I am one of those people who feels strongly, I think the data have supported this for decades, that there are a core set of emotions that we seem to share as humans. I mean, a very small set, and the form of their display, there's a lot of similarities, you know. So things like anger, sadness, fear, happiness, these are what we might call universals. There is a huge range of affect around that, of which there can be cultural variations. There are certain emotions that we have labels for in some cultures and not in others. You know, everybody likes to talk about the German Schadenfreude, you know, which is getting pleasure out of someone else's misery. Not that that isn't something that you experience or see in other cultures, but they have a word for it. And it takes, you know, in American English, we need a lot of words. One of the things that's the source of great variation across cultures is the social rules about what you're supposed to be doing. So, for example, I am a smiler. You mentioned we smile a lot. And I know that when I go to certain other places on the planet, that's not what other people do. It's not met with the same kind of response that I'm accustomed to. So I tend to play it down a little bit. I've even noticed that even here in the United States, walking around, if I'm smiling too much, I might use a smile control without even trying. And I notice it in my face because one of the things that comes from being a face expert is you not only notice things in other people, you feel what you're doing. You feel what you're sending out to the world. So I've noticed, especially if I'm walking down the street and I smile big at a stranger or something, I'll almost immediately go, that's the mentalis muscle, and it kind of helps dampen a smile. It's a smile control. And when I've noticed I was doing it and I tried to suppress it, I couldn't. I can't. It's so automatic. It's so learned. That's something that I adopted early on to learn that, well, I smile too big. I better, like, you know, dampen it a little bit, bring it down. And it's very hard to stop. Um, so one source of variation is when it's appropriate to show certain emotions and to whom. You know, some cultures you're never supposed to show, you know, things like anger or disgust or being displeased with authority. You know, it varies considerably. Um, Often, when people are tested in situations where there's nobody observing, you will see a lot of the similarities between cultures or across cultures emerge. But when they're being observed by others or there's a cultural context, the differences will be heightened. So that's just a quick oversimplification, but there's like core similarities and then there's a whole slew of differences. Interacting digitally, not what we're doing so much, but with social media, is having an effect on emotions. Everything from something that we've been talking about for a long time, things like cyberbullying and things like that, when people are not directly in contact with one another, there are absent the face-to-face interaction. If you're interacting digitally without that element, where people are much bolder about what they'll say. They don't censor themselves as much. And it can be very provocative and lead to very unpleasant interactions, cruelty, and things like that. Then there's this thing that I've just noticed anecdotally is, you know, I recently got on TikTok to just talk about some facial expression stuff and get an opportunity to reach out to more people because I know it's such a popular platform. And it's been very interesting to see. For example, 10 years ago, I first started noticing something about the selfie smile and how people smile differently like this in selfies, which is really different from the normal smile. With, you know, the normal smile is zygomaticus major. With a selfie, people tend to engage with the caninus muscle or levator anguli oris, this muscle that's a much steeper smile like this. But you look familiar? And so there was this tendency in selfies for people to go, you know, like that. And they would do a little of zygomatic and a little of the caninus or levator anguli oris, which was not the natural smile. And that was a selfie smile. Suddenly this action, which was not common in the human behavioral repertoire, became very common. And, you know, so I've made a few videos talking about the selfie smile. And all of a sudden, Especially the reason I brought up TikTok is noticing there, people aren't smiling as much in selfies. It's more this kind of thing. I don't know why, but it's happening, right? So I noticed that change. It could just be a fad, whatever. But a colleague of mine was telling me something about some informal data she collected. She's trying to get a grant to do more research on this. Is that she's noticing in her students with some little demos that she does in class, some of the basic facial recognition that we all have for some of these, universal emotions is starting to drop off. And the reason about the self is like there's less facial behavior, less one face-to-face interaction between people, and a lot of interaction between people, between peers, is happening electronically. And some of it through these artificial ways of not direct, but I would look at this and you look at this, and we talk about looking at that, but we're not having as much in-person conversation. So that, we really do need some data on this, but facial behavior is changing. And even though there's shared understanding and this whole notion of universals, it depends on seeing it to get that knowledge to get triggered. What if you're not seeing it? What happens? So I do think technology and social media are having an effect on human facial behavior and our understanding of it. Well, a couple solutions. First of all, is more in-person interaction and not being on devices all the time. I'm actually, it's funny. I recently just launched this thing called Facial Expressions 101, which is just this really short tutorial for people, like a 30-minute tutorial, and it's like a really inexpensive offering. And I did that kind of, just for like everyday knowledge, stuff that I think most people should have about the way certain facial expressions look. So that was really partly, like, is there a market for this? The market being everyday people, just everyday people. It might be something that's useful to scientists and artists and, whoever, but I partly had these kinds of folks in mind, tools for folks just to learn. Because on the one hand, it's knowledge that is, been consistent for humanity for a very long time. On the other hand, we are now living in situations that are different from the ones we evolved in, and we're not reinforcing that knowledge often enough. So I think there is a solution, training, just being around people more often rather than projections of people. And even if we've gotten really used to interacting this way, it is different from being face to face.